back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, so I'm here today to do 2 reviews for 2 very different books. The first one is I would say, general fiction book maybe, and that is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. It is one of the only books he's ever written that doesn't have any magical realism in it, so it was kind of a different adventure for me than I expected, but I will tell you a bit more about it in a second. The other book that I'm going to be reviewing is actually a novella, and it's one of the Tor.com novellas. It is Cold Forge Flame by Marie Brennan, who is the author of the Natural History of Dragons Lady Trent series, which you guys know I love. So I picked this one up because I love the author, and it's the first one in a series of novellas where I think the second one comes out early next year. It's called the Re-Barakai series. So let's start off with Norwegian Wood. Norwegian Wood is a book that I've had on my shelf for quite a while, and I kind of wasn't sure if I was going to like it or not, and I ended up not really liking it, to be honest. I mean, there were bits that I liked because it is interesting and it has some really intense discussions about things, and there was a lot I didn't like. It's very, very, very overly sexualized, this book, to me, and I like sex in books. I think it's interesting sometimes. It can be really great when it's done well, and it can really build relationships, and I don't think this did that at all. I think, in fact, this was a very, very unhealthy look at sex, a very unhealthy look at mental problems that people might have and the ways to deal with them. And I just think it's quite a disturbing book overall. It just did not work for me. Now, that's not to say that this is not a book that loads of people love, because loads of people love this. I just, coming from reading 1Q84 by him, did not go into this expecting it to be what it was. And I wanted magical realism, and I wanted less sex, and I wanted more of a plotline. And it wasn't really any of those things. We follow 2 major characters, although one is the centre focus and the other one is kind of the character who he goes and visits. So our main character is called Toru, and he is devoted to one of his best friends, Naoko. And Naoko is always a little bit kind of crazy throughout this book. She has mental health problems. She has been through a lot. She had a best friend who was her boyfriend who died, as did Toru, because they were all good friends together. And she's taken it very, very badly. She has reacted in a way that is quite unhealthy. She is not really being the person she could be and living up to her full potential. She is handling life very badly, and Toru sees this, but he has a love for her. He has a connection for her. He wants her to be okay. He wants her to get through it, and he kind of lives in this world of waiting for her to get better. And that's what we see throughout the entire book, is him waiting for her to get better, but also going off and living his life and getting into all sorts of crazy sexual antics and going and doing mad things with his friends and meeting other people and trying out things with them. And it's just kind of a mess to me, and that's what this whole book felt like, was a bit of a sexual mess. A sexual mess. That's kind of what this book felt like. It just felt like none of the characters felt genuine to me. They felt as though they all had problems. Even when there were moments that I did enjoy, where they were discussing things that were like big topics, or they were discussing how they felt, or they were opening themselves up a bit, all of those things were good, and I liked them. And then we would have moments that were just really way too long on the sex scenes, and way too much emphasis on how much sex they wanted to have, and I just didn't really care. Like, I just wasn't very interested. So it wasn't for me. I will still read Haruki Murakami's work, because I do think that he is a good writer, and I've read a couple of his books. I've read 1Q84, Volume 1, 2 and 3, and I've also read The Strange Library, and because they had magical realism elements and they didn't just focus on sex, I think they were interesting. I think they were really cool and weird and wacky, and this wasn't any of those things. This was just a bit of a boring, kind of crappy story, and I didn't really like it. So apologies if that upsets you, but it just was not for me. I think his other books are just way more up my street, and so I will be sticking to the magical realism end of his work from now on. I do believe that this might be one of the only ones he's ever published that isn't magical realism, so maybe I just made an error with picking up this one next, but oh well. I do think the mental health aspects within this book were interesting to read about, and I think there were some really good moments that were discussed and some good emotions that kind of came through from some of the major characters. And there were some twists and some things I didn't necessarily see coming quite as they did, but there was a lot I did see coming and there was a lot I didn't like. So I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars overall. It was okay. the writing wasn't terrible, but it just really wasn't for me plot-wise, and the characters just fell flat for me, so it's not my kind of book, and I gave it a 2. The next one I have to talk about is Cold Forge Flame, which is by Marie Brennan, and as I said, I picked this one up because I've read A Natural History of Dragons and that series by Marie Brennan, and I loved her stuff when she did that. So I picked this one up just based on that. I didn't really know anything about it, although the blurb did sound interesting. So what this is it's quite a unique way to tell a story. It's told in first person, and it's told in present first person, so things are happening around our main character as we read them. It's quite jarring to me to read a book that's in first person present tense. It just feels a bit weird. Definitely took me a little while to kind of get into it and kind of connect to the character, and I mean, I don't know if I fully connected because it is super short, but it took me a while to get into the story pacing and to get into the way it was written, and so the beginning was a little bit of a challenge. However, once I got into it, I think there are some interesting ideas. It's definitely a setup book. It feels as though there's a lot being set up for possibly later in the series. I'm not sure how long this collection of novellas is going to be. I know there's a second one, but I don't know if it is just the second one or if there's going to be loads of them, or I feel like this could be one where there's loads because it's definitely got potential and it's definitely got whimsy and magic to it. I don't want to tell you anything about the character that we're following because the character doesn't really know herself in this, and you kind of discover things about her as you go through, and that's part of the charm of this story, and part of the thing is discovering her and discovering her discover herself, if that makes sense. So I quite enjoyed the overall thing. I don't think it's the sort of story you should go into knowing too much, but I think if you go in knowing that it's told in first person present tense, maybe that will help you to adjust to it a bit quicker than I did. It's set in a quite icy landscape and quite rural, tribal landscapes. I quite like the setting of it, and I think the characters that we meet are interesting. It's very hard to say a huge amount about this because it is such a short book. It's like less than 100 pages and not a huge amount happens. It's an adventure and it's a discovery of herself, but that's kind of all it is. And it's only kind of tip of the iceberg stuff. I feel like it's going to get deeper into it when we get further through, but to me this felt like maybe the first few chapters of a book, which I guess it is in the long term, and it didn't feel like an overall book, so I ended up giving it a 3.5. I definitely liked it. I definitely, once I got into it, thought it was a very interesting concept, but I had my issues because I wanted more from it, and I was definitely a bit jarred from it in the beginning, and yeah, there were some weird things going on. So I'm intrigued. I'm definitely going to pick up the next one to try it out and see what happens there, but it's a bit weird, it's a bit peculiar. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you guys have read this one, because I don't think I know anyone else who's read it, so I would be interested in hearing what you guys have to say on the matter if you have read this one. So let me know that down below. And if you've read any really good fiction or novellas recently, do leave me recommendations down below too. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video very, very soon. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.